Studios in Manhattan, New York. Nick LaCalzi here with the great one, Rangers agitator, former enforcer, former Vogue intern, and now author, Sean Avery. Sean, how you doing?
Good, man. Thanks for having me. The great one, the Grate.
Yeah, not to be confused with Wayne.
Yeah.
To be confused
Just
with
want to
Wayne.
make sure about that.
But, all right, so let's break it down. I mean, how did writing a book compare to getting mentally prepared for an NHL season?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting because, so the book is based off of a template by Jim Bouton's Ball 4, which I think is one of the most famous and well-written sports memoirs in the last 40 years. I kind of just rolled into it. What I did was I actually used the schedule from my first year to my last year, and I used that as sort of my memory markers. So I would look at game one of my first season in the NHL, and then everything started to kind of flood open. I would generally look in the penalty box column first before the goals or assists. And I'd see, we played Chicago that night. Bob Probert wanted to kill me. Scotty Bowman saved my life. Now I'm on to the next one. So it was a fun process.
It had to take a while to go back through all the different box scores.
Yeah, it was. It's amazing how much information there is online now, and they do a great job of showing the history of, like, you can find anything, as far as minutes played, shots on goal, the whole gamut. So it took a few months to initially get the timeline and sort of the rough bones and the outline, but it was a 2-year process altogether.
Did you go back through the fights and pick and choose which one you thought were the best ones to write about?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about I think that the good thing about the book is that I'm very vulnerable, and I don't talk about just my goals and the great moments. I mean, and there's a lot. There's a Duvey Westcott fight. It was the first fight I ever had in the NHL that I got knocked out in. Yeah. So interesting stuff that, I'm not embarrassed to talk about the bad fights, because you can't have. This isn't Mayweather. You're not 50-0 in your NHL career. You got losses, and those are the fun stories.
Yeah, and you did an unbelievable job. I think what I found the most interesting is how you went in deep. You were in your love life. You were in the good and the bad of Sean Avery. And a lot of the book is controversy, which seems like it followed you throughout your NHL career. Why do you think that was? What was so controversial about Sean Avery?
Well, I think that over a certain amount of time, it became more about the person than the actual incident. Like, if you look at the sloppy seconds incident, the league sent me to rehab for 30 days with drug addicts and alcoholics. Yeah. It's funny because I asked for the report from the facility in Malibu, and it took them a few months to get it to me because I was going to put it in the book, and it was 2 pages, and I called them back and said, did you guys forget to add some more pages, assuming that, I was there for 30 days. Medically, they probably had more records.
Yeah.
And they said, no, that's it. You really weren't supposed to be here. And both pages said I was a narcissist, which I said of course I'm a narcissist. Any athlete, most athletes are narcissists. You have to be a narcissist to be great at a sport. So I think the crimes didn't fit the punishments a lot of the time. And certainly as time went on, I think it was a cat and mouse game of they were trying to get ahead of me in a certain extent.
Do you think that your reputation, which seemed to precede you, were you able to use that to your advantage on the ice towards the later parts of your career? Were you able to intimidate players or cause more havoc just based off of the villain, as you say, that you played?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Marty Brodeur looked at the schedule at the start of the season and saw when he was playing the Rangers before the season had even started, and we hadn't even created any friction yet based on the previous season, the timeline of Rangers Devils. So I had that advantage where I know guys could look at the schedule. I also know that before games, coaches would say, don't let Avery get in your head type of thing. And I think that when that was the conversation, I was doing my job, and I was doing.
You already won. If the coach is talking about you pregame, then you already won the battle. Back to the Elijah Cuthbert comments, just because it stood out to me. It's the one thing that you seem to regret, and I think rightfully so. but I'm sure you still follow the Rangers. Last year's playoffs, I believe it was Kreider who fought Phaneuf.
Yeah.
The legend of Sean Avery returned to MSG. Did you hear the chant?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the Ranger fans are they're not very forgiving in the sense that they're also New Yorkers, and their R-rated type of commentary in a game is unlike any other fan. So I definitely sat back and saw what was going on. As far as talking about it in the book, I talk about it in the sense that I don't regret anything that I've ever said over the course of my career. But that certain instance, there was a person that I was intimately involved with in my life for a big part of my life. And, I regret bringing her into a conversation. And I think that that's when I look back at it, I can't keep saying I regret this, because I don't regret anything that I ever
you regret
said.
that you hurt someone,
Yeah.
Elijah.
Yeah. Somebody that, I had a personal relationship with
Yeah.
that everybody else really wasn't privy to. So I think it's interesting when you make mistakes like that. I think it's, you have to come to peace with that person, and then you try and move outwards after.
You talk about your part of your game was an act. Was that the only time in your career where the act crossed over into your off ice life?
I think that's a good question. No, I think that, we're a person, right? What sports and what's amazing about sports is they give you this costume, and they allow you to do things that you're not allowed to do in your regular life. And the lines sometimes get crossed. We're allowed to do things as athletes, and we're actually promoted when we do things as athletes that you can't do in your regular life. But you're still that person. You walk away, you have to look at yourself at the end of the night in the mirror. So that was probably the most obvious time where life mirrored the game.
You talk about in the book, the NHL doesn't promote its players very well. I think that's accurate. They don't like, or they don't really shine on personalities unless it's the big guns. And you see it with you back in the day. You could say there was controversy, and I understand that. But someone in today's game, like a PK Subban, who is known for his charity work and is this and is that, and you see him getting hated on by certain analysts for dancing pregame or for the style of his game. Do you think that kind of is the NHL way?
Yeah, I do, and I think it's ridiculous, because when these people criticize somebody like PK Subban, they're only doing it for clickbaits. Yeah. It comes from such a selfish place, because I know the fans love it.
Right.
The fans are craving for athletes to show some of their personality. The conversation now today is we're so sick and tired of hearing the same conversation from athletes after the game. And there's a great part in the book, which I think was the most fun I had in writing the book, where I do sort of a mock interview, which is
Let's not get into the full details of it.
It's extremely R-rated, but that's what's going on in our head.
Yeah.
And you could play a soundbite and initially replace a guy's face, and it would be the same soundbite from every single player in the league. And the fans don't want to hear it. They're tired of it.
And you see the one guy who now gets a bit of the exception is Jagr, right? But even you go back to Jagr's playing days in Washington, and he was maligned. He got traded to the Rangers for Anson Carter. It was a giveaway.
Yeah.
And he revived his career in New York right before you got there. There's a threshold, I think, where once a player reaches a certain point, that's when the NHL allows their personality out. But it took Jagr, 14 years in the league to get there?
Yeah, and Jags is one of the most interesting, funny European players that I ever played with. And I don't think until he got to New York and he sort of started to carve a relationship with Larry Brooks that you saw his how much he loved the game, how much of a big kid he was, and how funny and sarcastic and self-deprecating he is at times, a lot of the time. And they don't show that. It's always Crosby, Ovechkin. Let's just show the head-to-head for the 38th time in the last 3 years, and it's boring. The fans don't want to see it.
There's a great story about Jagr and how superstitious he is.
Yeah.
How long did his toenails actually get?
No, I mean, it would get to a point where it was dangerous because if he took a shot, if he got a shot off his foot, his toenails would basically explode off of his toes. So Yogs was a crazy I mean, I saw him sometimes in games. He'd get his skates sharpened 15 times. It was I've never seen a player so particular about their equipment and so superstitious about everything from cutting his steak to obviously cutting his toenail.
Cutting his steak?
Yeah, I mean, how many times he would cut his steak before he would take a bite, or I wouldn't put anything past
So
Yogs.
is he crazy?
I look at it as being focused on a level that regular people don't understand. It takes over his life.
Yeah. How big of a role do you think envy played in the perception of Sean Avery? Because you say in the book, and it's accurate, as somebody who lived through the heart of the Sean Avery era as a kid and who loved every second of the Garden chanting Avery, you are probably the most talked about third liner ever in the NHL. And that is rare. You don't see, even hardcore fans of the NHL can't name the average third liner in the NHL. Do you think that envy played a role in why people tried to shut down Sean Avery?
Yeah, and I think it's one of the reasons why I was actually even given an opportunity in the league is that when I came in on Detroit, there was no envy. There wasn't anyone in a dressing room that were, upset that I was who I was.
Yeah.
It was 11 Hall of Famers that were all extremely comfortable with where they were in their life, where they were in their career. And then as you start going, and certainly when I got in LA and you sit across from guys that are saying to themselves, well, why is this guy popular? He's the same type of player as I am. Right. We make the same amount of money. I've actually played more NHL games than him. So that was always a fine balance. And I have an interesting story with Luc Robitaille in LA, who he kind of realized that because Luke had been in the spotlight for a long time. It was always something that I balanced, and it was always something that it was tough. It was difficult to manage.
Do you think some of that comes from the winning culture that Detroit established? Detroit, that's a little thing that there gets swept under the rug, and you talked about the difference between Detroit and maybe that's one of the meccas in the NHL as far as organizations go.
Yeah.
And then you go to LA. It's before they were winning. It's before Kopitar Quick. It's after Gretzky. They're in no man's land almost out there in LA. Is that a losing attitude almost?
Yeah, the winning organizations don't nitpick. They don't micromanage. They let the 20 guys, 25 guys, certainly in the hockey world, they let them police the room. And that's one thing that I talk about also, where certainly when we talk about the Bugard situation, taking a guy out of an environment where it's his safe zone and players police each other is the biggest detriment an organization can put on a dressing room. And coaches that micromanage, general managers that micromanage, Dean Lombardi put me on double secret probation when I was in LA. He hadn't even met me yet. That was my first meeting I had with him, and I was already on double secret probation. At that point, I don't even know if I'd ever even been suspended in the NHL. So it was always an interesting old school mentality that I was always fighting against. And, I'd like to say that I tried to stay ahead of it to a certain extent.
Do you think that you would be perceived differently in today's NHL? You hit on your internship at Vogue in the book, the Andy Cohen rumor, if you will. And you say back then, it's really not that long ago, but it's a much different world today than it was then. Do you think your perception, because it's not like you were out there committing crimes and you hit on that, the difference between your issues in the NHL and like every other sport and even other players in the NHL who get, you don't want to say free passes, but it happens, it's handled, it's done, and it doesn't follow them around, whereas your stuff, followed you for your entire career, and it wasn't crimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think now it's a double-edged sword there, because everyone has the ability to create a movement through social media.
Right.
So anyone can sit at home and say, I don't like this guy. I don't like what he just said, and I'm going to rally all the troops behind me, and we're going to bang down some doors until, he pays. He
Yes.
pays a price. So in that situation, I think it would have been, it was an advantage to come earlier, pre-social media, so to say. The other part of that is the perception, and I did an internship at Vogue. A few years later, it became the hot, cool thing to do.
Right.
Dwayne Wade did one at GQ or Men's Vogue after me. Certainly fashion now is accepted across the board in sports.
It's promoted.
I saw the Cam Newton did his interviews after the game this
The outfits
weekend.
are talked about more than the comments sometimes.
And where 10 years ago it was, I walked on a plane in Dallas with a short suit and they told me to go home and change, and the plane waited. Like, it's a totally different space now, but I think it's more dangerous because of the effect of social media and how people can, fight these wars without really being informed.
Right, that mob mentality. Do you think you could have counteracted it, though, by having a voice? Because at that time, I mean, outside of beat writers, social media wasn't a thing. The message was controlled by the league.
Yeah, I definitely think, me personally, it would have been an advantage because I don't back down on my social channels, and I don't get afraid of that initial wave of people trying to start that movement.
Right.
You can't be intimidated by it when you believe that what you're saying is not the devil. And, that's where you get in trouble, and that's really where guys are afraid to speak up, and why you see certainly the NHL, it's not worth it for guys now. They don't want to take the risk.
Yeah. I want to get back to Andy Cohen, because you were really one of the first professional athletes to come out in support of equality, and gay marriage and all that. And now it's much more, it's accepted. Like it's spoken about regularly, and rightfully so. But what you did then doesn't really get the coverage that it probably should deserve.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what doesn't get talked about is the fact that Jim Dolan, who's the owner of the Rangers, allowed me to do a public service announcement for marriage equality in New York State in a New York Ranger jersey. And I think that had I had an owner that I was somewhat nervous about expressing my position on marriage equality, I would have never gone near it.
Yeah.
I was lucky to have a guy like Jim Dolan be the owner of the team, where I understood that he embraced personalities. He's a loyal guy, very open-minded. I was in a position to be lucky to be able to do something like that. So when they asked, I said, yeah, no problem. I had also played in 2 markets and lived in West Hollywood and in LA when I was playing for the Kings. And then when I came to New York, I lived in Chelsea. So I was surrounded by the LGBT community, and it was just part of who I was at that point.
Let's stay on Dolan, because he, for the most part, is vilified in New York. And I think one thing that I found very interesting in Ice Capades here was that you humanized James Dolan. And you call him one of the best owners in sports. Here's a guy who hasn't won in a while, but he's always putting the money into these teams. Nothing he does is the reason they lose. As far as, I shouldn't say that, some decisions he makes are poor, but it's not for a lack of effort.
No, I mean, from a player's standpoint, it would be tough to find a player that says that Jim Dolan's not the best owner in sports, because we have the best planes, we have the best hotels, we have the best food, we have the best equipment, we have the best trainers, we have the best of everything when you're a Knick or a Ranger. And as an owner, there's nobody more loyal as well. That's part of what gets him in trouble, I think, sometimes. Certainly the Isaiah situation. Look at, he hired Isaiah back. He's a loyal man that really respects his athletes. And I think that, I got in trouble in California. I got arrested at my house in Laurel Canyon for, there's a party, and I don't know, some cops that were a little bit, in a bad mood, and it was a bad situation. And before I know it, I'm at the station, and I have Blair Burke, who represented Mel Gibson and a lot of big names, is my lawyer. That didn't come from anyone other than the top of the Rangers organization. That's, as a player, you can't get a better owner than that. It's as good as it gets.
That's awesome. And I think that's a opinion of him that is, it might be widespread amongst the players, but it's not shared publicly.
Yeah, well, it's not an interesting storyline for certainly in New York when it's the Bash Dolan train.
Right.
But they have Garden of Dreams. They are an organization from a business standpoint that do so much for the city of New York. And I guess the good thing is that, with the exception of a few occasions, Jim Dolan doesn't get fazed by it. He's a pro with the media. He's understood the New York market and how to manage it as well as anybody could, considering how much heat the guy takes.
Yeah, agreed. And staying with the Rangers here and Dolan, John Tortorella plays a huge theme in this book.
Yeah.
Was it as bad as... as a fan and as someone who followed the Rangers, I didn't really grasp how bad it was. Your relationship with Tortorella was that bad.
Yeah. I mean, somebody told a story yesterday that I just kind of shook my head at, where if a reporter's phone rang in a scrum after a game, he would kick them out of the meeting. And that was the mentality of that guy. He micromanaged everything. There's a story about me being on the set of Moneyball and getting a call from Tortorella. He used to do these check-in calls with me. And I think it was to see that I was somewhere that didn't agree with the hockey world. And next thing I know, I'm on a plane coming home from California. I never ended up shooting the movie. That was the relationship. And as soon as you tell me that I can't do something, it always goes in the opposite direction.
Why do you think that was? Because throughout the book, you keep thinking that you're going to win him over, and your play, rightfully so at times, should have won him over. You were a key piece on some very good Ranger teams, maybe not the most talented teams in the league, but I will say it seemed like Tortorella got a lot as far as hardworking talent goes from his players. Yeah. You're beloved by Lundqvist. Sather likes you. You're friends with Gaborik, who Tortorella always had problems with. But do you think there's something looking back that you could have done better to win over him, or are you happy with the effort that you put into that?
No, I mean, I think if I look back and think if I had wanted to continue being a hockey player, the best thing I would have done is had me traded as quick as possible when I came into the Tortorella situation. That relationship was non-existent from the moment that I came into the situation, because he had previously ripped me on television in Canada, and it was a whole thing. So I couldn't have done anything different for that relationship. I worked as hard as I could. It's really a testament to how much I love New York and how much I love the Rangers. Really is how I stuck through it. It's tough going to work every day when you know your boss is doing everything in his power to get rid of you.
Does his success today in Columbus surprise you?
No. I mean, I think nothing surprises me in sports at this point. And he's a prepared coach. He puts the time in. He has won before. When I talk about people in my relationships in the book, I talk about my relationships, and I don't generally, for the most part, try and attack the work that they've put in and where they've got. I criticize some of these coaches and say it's tough for them to understand a hockey player when they never played. Yeah. I personally think if I'm running $1 billion business, the guy that's running it has been in the trenches doing exactly what he's telling people they need to do. So sports is a funny thing. It's an interesting path where sometimes people are in positions that they say the right things and they do all the right things at times, and then it's a different thing behind closed doors.
Yeah, interesting. Let's get to the Rangers here. Any other good stories in the book? We can't go into details about the one story about Lundqvist in it.
Yeah.
And if you want a funny story that should make you laugh, read the book, because it's great about the King. Outside of that, are there any other Henrik Lundqvist stories that the public doesn't know?
Yeah, I mean, I think I talk a lot about Hank's focus and how prepared he is going into games. We always catered the soundtrack before a game to Hank's desires. And I think that the Swedish singer Robin, she had a big song early on. And we listened to that song probably for 6 years in a row. That song, I heard that song every single day for so many years, well past the chart-topping years of that song.
Yeah.
So I think it's just interesting when you see the little tidbits of guys, your favorite player, things that you never really hear about.
Right. And, there's another goalie in this area that you had some run-ins with, and I mean some run-ins.
Yeah.
Marty Brodeur. Was there anything that was off limits in that rivalry with Brodeur?
No. I mean, one thing about me, when I trash talked, I never made things up. I always used...
That's apparent in the book.
I always used things that were reality. And, like, if something's true, if you've done something and your character is questioned... Because of that, then I'm going to use that as an opportunity to really go right to the core of it.
Right.
Because my job is very clear. I need to do whatever I can to put my team in an advantage. And outside of, going into certain things like disease, alcoholism, sexuality, preference, those were the things that I stayed away from.
Right.
Everything else was on the table. And I'll never apologize for it because that's what I was there to do.
You were?
Yeah.
The Avery rule, was he saying anything to you when you're standing there looking him in the eyes?
No, the funny thing about that is Chris Drury came over and whispered something into my ear. And he said, I'll paraphrase without the with the PG rating of it. They're gonna get you. That was basically what Drew said.
Yeah.
Brodeur's eyes just went from, it was like in a cartoon where you see the boiling water come up into the character's eyes. That's what was happening with him. The whites of his eyes just started going redder and redder until they got to the top, and he looked like it was like the devil. He was so confused and so upset at that moment, and I'll never forget it because I'm the only one that had privy to those eyes through the mask. And it's something that I'll never forget.
And then less than 30 seconds later, what makes it great, it's not just the act of dancing in front of him with your hand in his face. It's got to be the goal.
Yeah.
And that's just a good hockey play. You're in the right position. What was his reaction when you scored after that entire ordeal?
I could see it was like letting the air out of it was like popping a kid's balloon. I think that's the best way I could put it. Just the ultimate deflation at that moment. And obviously we were at home and it was a big game. It was a series of events that I'll never forget because I just had such a great vantage point for it.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone back and watched those videos on YouTube. Then he doesn't shake your hand. That is one of the most underrated, I think, rivalries in sports because you tortured a Hall of Famer. And we're talking a guy who's probably considered a top 3 goaltender in NHL history.
Yeah. Yeah. I had the city of New York behind me.
Yeah.
And when you feel that momentum wave come over you, 1, you don't want to ever disappoint it. 2, you feel untouchable. And there's no better feeling when a city like this gets behind you and roots for you. You're on top of the world. I mean, I think that's what everybody is craving for in the movies and in your dreams is to be able to take over the city of New York. And certainly Ranger fans, that was as good as it got for me.
And you did. It wasn't just Brodeur. We could talk about Mike Richards. There are a few rivalries that you created here that, I mean, the way you were adored at MSG is reserved for the greats. I mean, right now, the only remotely comparable excitement that a player brings outside of Lundqvist is maybe Zuccarello, but it's in a different way. I mean, superstars through the last decade outside of Jagr weren't adored by the fans like Sean Avery was.
Yeah, I mean, I had this uncanny ability to have the arena chant my name, which I've seen a few athletes have the ability to do it. I saw an incredible one night when LeBron scored 50 points in the Garden and they were chanting his name. Henrik Lundqvist could do it at the drop of a hat in the heyday.
Yeah.
It's interesting now, you go to games and it's sort of lost that magic. And somebody's been asking me, what would you say to, if you were on the Rangers right now, how would you try and get them out of their funk? What I say to a team that has the pleasure of playing in New York and Madison Square Garden is use that as an advantage. Tap into that arena and tap into the fans and make that the most exciting place that you get to walk into on a daily basis. I walked into MSG. You talk about these fights, the famous concerts. I got to go in there 40 times a year.
Yeah.
You know, that's a privilege that no athlete should take for granted, and you should take and squeeze every minute of that and use that as your seventh man.
The Rangers are struggling this year. Do you think they're missing a little bit of that juice? And is that an NHL-wide thing? Because fighting's way down, you know, it's not even slowly but surely anymore. It's trying to be removed from the game. Do you think that plays a role in the lack of energy, especially at MSG?
Yeah, I mean, you see it. There's no scrums. There's no. I talk about it in the book. You went to see Sean Avery when he was playing for the Rangers, and it was a coin toss. You had no idea what was going to happen. There could have been a brawl in warm-up. There could have been a bench-clearing brawl by the first period. There could have. I mean, you never knew what was going to happen. Right. Now, I went to a game, my first game since I retired, Rangers against Montreal last week. Nothing happens. No. I mean, you could fall asleep, literally. The most exciting part of the game was seeing the funny videos up on the screen. So I don't know why guys haven't taken the advantage to stand out in a very mundane environment across the board. Now, the quality and the product of the play is better than it ever has.
Right.
Superstars now in the league are taking over at 19 years old. That didn't happen when I was playing. Compare a superstar like Danny Heatley to Austin Matthews now, it's no comparison. So it's an interesting time in hockey for sure.
Do you think Sean Avery, if he was born 5 years later and is in the NHL today, would wreak more havoc, considering there's so many less people that play the way you did? It's almost a dying breed. And you talk about Hartnell in the book, Chris Neal. You know, there's a few guys who do what you did, and maybe they've had some seasons where they've put up more points, and it's a role where you walk the fine line between the enforcer, because, I mean, you're 5'10", and I'm sure you're built like a brick wall, but compared to the Derek Boogaards, you weren't fighting those guys. You know, in today's game, when you didn't have to worry about a Derek Boogaard or really, there's very few people to be as afraid of now in comparison to then. Do you think that you would just wreak havoc?
Well, I think it's an interesting question, because I would have had to cater my game to how well I would play in this day and age, because I could skate and move the puck with the best players in the world.
Right.
So I would have had to enjoy scoring goals now more than I was privy to prior, because I would have been able to do it.
Yeah.
It's a different game where I would have been able to thrive. So, you know, I can say right now that me in the NHL today, I'm one of the best players in the league because nobody is really pushing the envelope in that other direction. And it's still one of the most useful tools in sports. Richard Sherman in the NFL is a prime example.
Yep.
The villain and the antagonist and the guy that has the ability to put all the attention on himself is still an effective role. And I would have loved to have played now. You know, it would have been fun. I also might have got run out of the league at a much earlier pace because of how outside the box I would look now. You know, I still had the luxury of having guys in the league like Jeremy Roenick, or there were characters in the league when I was still playing. So I could deflect it a little bit, but now it's not the case.
What do you think the Rangers need to do in today's right now to fix their issues? And let's talk about your I'm sure you're still very good friends with him, Lundqvist. Has age caught up to the King, or do you think he still has it in him to rebound and the team needs to be playing better in front of him?
Well, I played with Dominic Hasek when he was 40 years old and he won a Stanley Cup in Detroit, and age wasn't an issue for him that year. Hank's a very similar goalie, actually, in a lot of ways, not from a style standpoint, but from a body type standpoint, from a focus standpoint. Hank's got a lot left in the tank. I really come back to it. I think they need to embrace the city that they play in more and that arena and use the fans and really kind of get that feeling back again.
Do you think there are guys on the roster that can do that, or is that going to be outside moves to, I don't think there's a Sean Avery in the NHL right now, but guys who play a little bit more of a gritty style? Because right now the Rangers are way more wide open.
Yeah. I mean, I think, listen, you don't understand the importance of guys like Ryan Callahan, Dan Girardi, Dan Girardi is a real warrior when you look at NHL standards. It's not all about the flash and the fights. It's about being able to have that gritty athlete that can handle big minutes. And I think that's what they're lacking now. And certainly losing Derek Stepan, that's become even more apparent, where you've got a guy that can handle those 25 minutes a night. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with them.
Do you think there are stats that can't measure that? Like you said, the Girardi, the warrior effect. It's hard, I think, now with advanced stats making a major push into the league and numbers, and you can't measure heart. There's no heart factor. That it is tough to measure. Do you think that it's lost its touch almost?
I think that it's starting to become somewhat unidentifiable. I think the salary cap has been a big factor in that because of turnover and it's difficult to keep guys in place for a long time now. There's always going to be warriors in sports. Right. You're never going to lose that. But I think that trying to keep those guys is the hardest job a general manager has nowadays.
All right, enough about the Rangers. What has Sean Avery been up to outside of this book? How's Warren 77? Any other ventures that the public doesn't know about?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I would say 18 months ago, a friend of mine, Peter Berg, put me in a movie called Patriots Day, and I was on the train ride home and just thinking about the fact that those couple of days on set felt the closest feeling that I had to when I was playing at MSG. You're on a street, there's 200 or 300 people around, and all of a sudden a director says action, and all the energy goes into two people. So I came back to New York, and for the last year and a half, I've been studying in a studio in the city, and the future of Sean Avery is I'm either going to be a broke, out-of-work actor, or I'm going to be a working actor in film, television, or in the theater space, because I can't lie to myself anymore, and I have to find that rush. And that's the thing in sports is people are always trying to figure out now CTE and how do the guys make the transition.
Right.
You have to be honest with yourself and understand that you're chasing that high. And until you can find something that replaces it, you're going to be lost. And I've found something, and now you're not going to tell me that I can't do anything.
Right.
So it's an exciting time right now, and the book was alongside of that. This time that I could reflect and open up and become vulnerable, and it's all related to each other.
Are there any roles that you have lined up for the future?
Yeah, I'm actually doing Pete Berg's new movie, Mile 22. Which is Mark Wahlberg's the star in again, and it starts shooting in a few weeks in Atlanta and Bogota, I believe.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Sean. Well, thank you for joining me, and I'm sure any Sean Avery fans out there, the book is an absolute must-read for hockey fans. We didn't even get into Chelios and Brett Hull and some of the stories that aren't ABC approved. But it was a fantastic read.
Great. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.